If you clicked on this video, you're about to encounter quantum truth so fundamental, so disruptive to everything you've been conditioned to believe about reality, that your brain will literally reorganize after comprehending it. Not metaphorically reorganize, actually reorganize. Neural pathways restructuring, conceptual frameworks dissolving, foundational assumptions about existence collapsing and rebuilding around truth that contradicts consensus reality, but explains actual nature of what you are and where you exist. This isn't hyperbole. Neuroscience confirms that encountering information fundamentally incompatible with existing worldview triggers neural reorganization as brain attempts to integrate truth that doesn't fit current mental models. And quantum truth you're about to understand is maximally incompatible with worldview you were taught, making reorganization not just possible, but inevitable once comprehension occurs. There's specific quantum truth that changes everything once understood, not surface-level fact about quantum mechanics, but implication of quantum mechanics so profound that fully comprehending it dissolves boundary between you and reality, between observer and observed, between consciousness and manifestation. This truth isn't hidden in complex mathematics. This truth is simple, direct, undeniable once stated clearly. But simplicity makes it more disruptive rather than less, because you can't dismiss it as too complicated to understand or too abstract to apply. This truth is immediately comprehensible, and immediate comprehension triggers immediate reorganization. Most people never encounter this truth clearly stated. They learn fragments of quantum mechanics, observer effect, wave function collapse, superposition, but never see how those fragments combine into single devastating recognition that explodes classical worldview completely. They maintain compartmentalized understanding where quantum weirdness applies to particles in laboratories, while their life remains governed by classical assumptions about solid matter, separate self, external objective reality. That compartmentalization protects brain from reorganization. But once you see the truth that makes compartmentalization impossible, once you understand implication that applies to your existence directly, brain has no choice but to reorganize around new understanding, because old framework can't contain truth that's been comprehended. Can you feel the anticipation mixed with resistance? Part of consciousness wants to know truth that changes everything. Another part wants to maintain comfortable, familiar worldview, even if that worldview is false. The resistance is normal. Brain prefers stability over accuracy, prefers maintaining existing neural structures over reorganizing them. But consciousness that clicked this video has already chosen truth over comfort, has already committed to knowing even if knowing disrupts everything. That commitment will carry you through reorganization that follows comprehension. Quantum mechanics isn't just physics describing how small particles behave. Quantum mechanics is description of reality's fundamental nature that applies to everything, including you, your consciousness, your experience of existence. And when you understand what quantum mechanics actually says about observer and observed, about measurement and reality, about consciousness and physical world, you discover truth so radical that classical worldview can't survive contact with it. The worldview that says you're separate, self-observing external objective reality collapses. And what emerges from that collapse is recognition so liberating and so terrifying that brain must reorganize to accommodate it. Ancient mystics knew this truth through direct experience. They tried communicating it through paradoxes, koans, teachings designed to break logical mind and force recognition beyond conceptual understanding. Modern quantum physics arrived at same truth through experimental evidence and mathematical proof. Different paths, same truth. And that truth is, the observer isn't separate from observed. Consciousness isn't separate from reality. You aren't experiencing predetermined external world. You're participating in creating experienced world through observation that collapses probability into actuality. Not philosophically, not metaphorically, actually, physically, quantum mechanically. Take a breath. Deep one. Because what comes next states the truth explicitly. States it so clearly that you can't misunderstand, can't dismiss, can't compartmentalize away from direct application to your existence. And once you understand this truth, once comprehension occurs fully, your brain will begin reorganizing. Not instantly, reorganization takes time as neural pathways restructure, but inevitably, because truth incompatible with current worldview forces brain to choose between denial and reorganization, and consciousness seeking truth chooses reorganization even though it's disruptive. You're about to understand quantum truth that makes denial impossible. Prepare for reset. Here's the truth stated directly. You're not passive observer watching predetermined reality unfold. You're active participant collapsing quantum probability field into experienced reality through observation. Before you observe, reality doesn't exist in definite state. It exists as superposition of all possible states simultaneously. Your observation causes one possibility to collapse from superposition into the definite experience you perceive. You're not discovering what's already there. You're determining what appears through act of observing. Not sometimes, not occasionally, every moment, every observation, every experience. Reality doesn't exist independently waiting to be observed. Reality comes into definite existence through your observation collapsing probability into actuality. This isn't interpretation or philosophy. This is what quantum mechanics demonstrates experimentally. Double-slit experiment proves particles exist in superposition until observed, then collapse into definite state when observation occurs. Delayed choice experiments prove observation retroactively determines what happened even after event occurred. Quantum eraser experiments prove you can change past by changing what's observed in present. All of this converges on same conclusion. Observation doesn't passively reveal pre-existing reality. Observation actively participates in determining what reality manifests from probability field. Applied to your experience. Right now, reading these words, you think you're observing text that exists independently on screen. But quantum mechanically before your observation, screen and text exist as probability field. Superposition of all possible states including screen with text, screen without text, screen that's different color, infinite variations. Your observation collapses that probability into specific experience of screen with text in this configuration. You're not seeing what exists objectively. You're seeing what your observation collapsed from probability field. The screen seems independent, but the screen's definite state exists because you observed it, causing collapse from superposition into experienced actuality. This applies to everything, not just quantum particles in laboratory. Everything is quantum system. Your body is superposition collapsing through observation into definite sensations. Other people are probability patterns collapsing through your observation into experienced presence. Physical world is quantum field collapsing into experienced environment through observation that determines which possibilities from superposition become actual. The solidity, the definiteness, the seeming independence of reality. All of this is appearance created by observation collapsing probability, not pre-existing condition you're discovering. Can you feel your brain starting to resist this? The resistance is predictable. This truth contradicts everything you were taught about being separate observer of independent external world. You were taught reality exists objectively, and your observation simply reveals what's there. But quantum mechanics proves that's false. Reality doesn't exist in definite state until observed. Reality exists as probability, and observation collapses probability into experienced definiteness. You're not observer of reality. You're co-creator of reality through observation that determines what manifests from quantum field of possibility. This recognition dissolves subject-object duality at fundamental level. There isn't you observing reality, two separate things interacting. There's unified quantum process where consciousness and physical manifestation are two aspects of single process. Observation and observed aren't separate. Consciousness and matter aren't different substances. Everything is quantum field, and what you call yourself is localized consciousness pattern observing quantum field and thereby collapsing it into experienced reality that includes experience of being separate observer. But that separation is illusion created by the process itself. Your quantum field observing itself and collapsing itself into experienced form through observation. Understanding this truth isn't just learning new information. Understanding this truth destroys foundational assumption brain has organized around assumption that you're separate from reality you observe. When that assumption dissolves, every belief, every concept, every understanding built on that foundation becomes unstable. Brain must reorganize around new foundation. You're not separate from reality. You're participating in reality's manifestation through observation that collapses probability into experience. That reorganization is what brain reset means. Not that you forget everything, but that everything you know gets recontextualized around truth, that you're not observer of reality, but participant in reality's continuous emergence from quantum probability field. Before brain can reorganize around quantum truth, it will attempt to resist, deny, or compartmentalize the truth to protect existing worldview. Understanding these resistance patterns helps you recognize when they're operating, so you can move through resistance rather than getting stuck in it. Because resistance isn't wrong, resistance is normal protective mechanism. But resistance prevents reorganization that's necessary for consciousness to evolve beyond limited classical worldview into quantum understanding that's more accurate even though more disorienting. The first resistance pattern is intellectual dismissal. This is just interpretation of quantum mechanics, not proven fact. Brain attempts to categorize truth as opinion rather than verified reality. But this dismissal fails when you examine evidence. Every quantum experiment confirms observation affects outcomes. Every test of quantum predictions validates mathematics that requires observation-dependent collapse. Copenhagen interpretation, many worlds interpretation, even objective collapse theories. All agree observation plays crucial role in determining what manifests. The specific mechanism is debated, but that observation affects reality is experimentally verified fact, not philosophical speculation. The second resistance is compartmentalization. Quantum effects only apply to particles, not to macroscopic reality. Brain tries to keep quantum truth confined to microscopic scale to protect classical worldview about everyday experience. But this compartmentalization is false. Everything is made of quantum particles. Your body, brain, environment, all composed of atoms following quantum rules. Decoherence makes quantum superposition hard to observe at macroscopic scale, but decoherence doesn't eliminate quantum nature. It just makes superposition branches separate rapidly, creating classical appearance from quantum substrate. Your world is quantum. Your observation collapses it. Scale doesn't change that fundamental dynamic. The third resistance is solipsism, fear. If I'm collapsing reality through observation, does that mean I'm creating everything and others don't exist? Brain recoils from implication that seems to make you sole creator with others being your creation. But this fear misunderstands quantum truth. You're not sole consciousness collapsing entire reality. You're one node of observation in interconnected field where multiple consciousnesses simultaneously collapse probability. Others exist as their own observation points, collapsing reality from their perspective. What you observe and what they observe overlaps through quantum entanglement, creating shared consistent reality without requiring single objective reality existing independently. You're not creating others. You're co-creating shared experience with others through multiple observation points affecting unified quantum field. The fourth resistance is responsibility avoidance. If my observation creates reality, that means bad things happening are my fault. Brain wants to avoid guilt by maintaining that reality is independent of observation, making you victim of circumstances rather than participant in manifestation. But quantum truth doesn't mean you consciously control everything that manifests. Most observation is unconscious. Most collapse is determined by probability distributions shaped by past events, by collective field, by physical laws, not by conscious intention. You participate in collapse through observation, but participation doesn't mean absolute control. Understanding truth isn't about blame. Understanding truth is about recognizing you're not powerless victim of external circumstances, but conscious participant affecting probability distributions through how and what you observe. The fifth resistance is existential destabilization. If reality isn't solid and independent, what can I trust? Brain experiences quantum truth as threatening because certainty dissolves. Certainty that you're separate self. Certainty that reality is objective. Certainty that past is fixed and future is predetermined. That dissolution feels like losing ground, losing stability, losing foundation you've built identity on. But destabilization is necessary for reorganization. Old foundation was false even though comfortable. New foundation is true even though initially disorienting. Brain will stabilize around quantum truth once reorganization completes. But during transition, destabilization is inevitable and necessary. Recognize these resistances operating in your consciousness right now. Notice thoughts appearing that dismiss, compartmentalize, fear, avoid responsibility, or feel destabilized. That's brain attempting to protect existing worldview from truth that threatens it. Don't fight resistance. Don't judge it. Just recognize it's happening. That recognition creates space where resistance can be witnessed without controlling response, allowing truth to penetrate even while resistance operates. Resistance will dissolve naturally as brain reorganizes. Forcing resistance to disappear before reorganization completes just creates more resistance. Allow resistance. Witness it. Continue understanding truth despite resistance. Reorganization will happen naturally if you don't let resistance stop comprehension. Now we deepen understanding by exploring what observation actually means in quantum mechanics. Because misunderstanding observation creates confusion about quantum truth. Most people think observation means consciously looking at something with attention, but quantum observation is more fundamental than conscious attention. Observation is any interaction that could, in principle, be known by consciousness, whether consciousness is currently attending to it or not. Understanding this clarifies how you're continuously collapsing reality, even when not consciously focusing on most of what you experience. Quantum observation occurs when system interacts with environment in a way that creates information that could be accessed by consciousness. Photon hitting your retina creates information that could become conscious sight. Sound wave vibrating your eardrum creates information that could become conscious hearing. Molecule binding to receptor creates information that could become conscious smell. These interactions cause collapse from superposition into definite states before consciousness becomes aware of what collapsed. By time consciousness attends to experience, collapse has already occurred through physical interaction that created accessible information. This means you're collapsing reality continuously through billions of quantum interactions per second, not just through occasional conscious attention. Every sensory input, every neural firing, every molecular interaction in body. All of these are observations in quantum mechanical sense. Interactions creating information potentially accessible to consciousness, thereby causing collapse from superposition into definite states. Most of this occurs unconsciously. But unconscious observation still collapses probability into actuality. You don't need to consciously focus on something to observe it quantum mechanically. The observation happens through physical interaction, and consciousness becomes aware of already collapsed results. But consciousness isn't irrelevant. While observation can occur unconsciously through physical interaction, conscious attention affects which observations occur and how probability distributions collapse. When consciousness focuses on something, neural activity associated with that focus creates additional quantum observations, potentially affecting probability distributions in ways unconscious observation wouldn't. Conscious intention might influence which possibilities become more probable before collapse occurs. Focused awareness might maintain quantum coherence longer than would occur naturally, allowing different collapse outcomes. Consciousness participates in quantum process, even though consciousness isn't required for every individual collapse. Applied practically, you're continuously collapsing reality through unconscious observation. Sensory input creating experienced world moment by moment through billions of quantum interactions. But conscious observation adds layer of influence. What you focus on, how you observe, what you expect to see potentially affects probability distributions before collapse, influencing what manifests from quantum field. You're not consciously creating every detail of experience, but you're participating in determining probabilities through conscious observation layered on top of unconscious observation that's happening continuously. This resolves apparent contradiction. If I'm collapsing reality, why doesn't everything I want appear? Because most collapse is unconscious, determined by probability distributions shaped by physical laws, past events, collective field, not by conscious desire. And conscious observation affects probabilities but doesn't override them absolutely. You participate in determining what manifests, but participation operates within constraints of quantum probability distributions that aren't unlimited. The participation is real, but participation isn't omnipotent control. You're one factor among many affecting what collapses from probability field. Understanding observation at this level clarifies quantum truth without making it seem magical or unlimited. You're collapsing reality through observation continuously. Most collapse is unconscious. Conscious observation adds influence. Influence operates within probabilistic constraints. All of this is quantum mechanics applied to experience. Not supernatural power, not wishful thinking, but actual process where consciousness participates in determining what manifests from quantum field through observation that collapses probability distributions into experienced actuality. That participation is more limited than ego wants, but more real than classical worldview acknowledges. 6 years ago, I encountered this quantum truth during physics course, and my brain literally reset over following weeks. I'd studied quantum mechanics before, understood mathematics, could explain experiments. But I'd maintained compartmentalization, quantum weirdness for particles, classical reality for experience. Then Professor stated implication explicitly. You're not observing independent reality. You're collapsing probability field into experienced reality through observation. This applies to your life, your body, your world, not just to particles in lab. That statement shattered compartmentalization, and brain started reorganizing immediately. Initial effect was disorientation so profound I questioned whether external world existed. If my observation collapses reality, what exists when I'm not observing? If reality is probability before collapse, what is probability? Is it real or abstract? If others are collapsing their own reality, how does my reality relate to theirs? Questions cascaded faster than answers appeared. The foundation I'd built understanding on, separate, self-observing, independent world, had dissolved, but new foundation hadn't formed yet. That gap between dissolution and reorganization was destabilizing, disorienting, occasionally terrifying. But disorientation wasn't consciousness breaking. Disorientation was brain reorganizing neural pathways around new understanding incompatible with old structures. Like renovating house while living in it, temporary chaos leading to better organization. I'd think about object and notice myself experiencing it as probability collapsing rather than as independent thing existing objectively. I'd interact with person and recognize interaction as mutual observation collapsing shared reality rather than as two separate selves encountering each other externally. Every experience became occasion to witness quantum dynamics operating in direct life rather than remaining abstract physics concept. The reorganization took 3 months to stabilize. Initially, oscillation between old classical perception and new quantum perception, sometimes seeing world as solid and separate, sometimes recognizing it as probability I'm collapsing. Eventually, quantum understanding integrated sufficiently that it became baseline. Not that I consciously think about quantum mechanics constantly, but that perception naturally recognizes I'm participating in reality's manifestation through observation rather than passively experiencing predetermined world. The integration wasn't returning to normal. The integration was establishing new normal where quantum truth is foundation consciousness operates from. What I learned through that process transformed everything about how I navigate existence. I'm not powerless observer of circumstances beyond control. I'm participant affecting what manifests through observation. Not omnipotent, not unlimited, but participating, influencing, co-creating through consciousness that collapses probability into experience. That recognition shifted from feeling like victim of external reality to recognizing I'm engaged in continuous co-creative process with quantum field. Circumstances don't just happen to me. Circumstances emerge through complex process I participate in through observation, even though I don't control all variables affecting what collapses. This is what I wish someone had told me before brain reset occurred. Disorientation is temporary and necessary. You're not losing grip on reality. You're adjusting to more accurate understanding of reality's actual nature. Old neural pathways organized around false assumption that you're separate from reality must dissolve. New pathways organized around truth that you're participant in reality's emergence must form. That reorganization creates temporary instability, but instability resolves into more stable, more accurate, more empowering understanding once reorganization completes. Don't resist disorientation. Don't fight confusion. Don't try to return to classical certainty that was comfortable but false. Allow reorganization to complete. Trust that brain will stabilize around quantum truth once neural restructuring finishes. Your reorganization might be gentler or more intense than mine was, might complete faster or slower, but mechanics are same. Encountering truth incompatible with existing worldview triggers neural reorganization as brain attempts to integrate understanding that doesn't fit current structures. That reorganization is what brain reset means. Not forgetting everything, not becoming different person, but recontextualizing everything you know around foundation that you're not separate observer, but participating consciousness collapsing reality through observation. Once reset completes, you can't return to believing you're merely observing independent external world, because you've understood truth that makes that belief impossible to maintain. To support brain reorganization, completing successfully rather than consciousness retreating to classical worldview to escape disorientation, you need to practice perceiving quantum dynamics operating in direct experience. Because intellectual understanding of quantum truth isn't sufficient for reorganization. Brain needs experiential evidence that confirms truth in lived experience, needs direct perception of consciousness collapsing reality, needs felt sense that you're participating in manifestation rather than just understanding concept about participation. These practices create experiential foundation supporting reorganization. The first practice is observation awareness, noticing act of observing rather than just noticing what's observed. Right now, you're reading words. Instead of focusing only on content, notice that you're observing words. Feel act of attention landing on text. Sense consciousness engaging with screen. Recognize moment of observation occurring. That meta-awareness of observing creates experiential recognition that observation is active process, not passive reception. You're not just receiving information, you're actively observing, actively attending, actively collapsing probability into experienced text through observation process you're now conscious of. The second practice is pre-observation awareness, noticing moment before something comes into definite experience. When you're about to look around room, pause before looking. Notice that space where you're not yet observing has uncertain quality. You don't know exactly what will be there until you observe it. Then observe and notice how observation brings definite experience into awareness. Before looking at clock, space where time would be displayed is uncertain. Then you look and specific time appears through observation. That practice creates experiential recognition that definiteness emerges through observation rather than existing before observation occurs. The third practice is probability sensing, feeling potential before collapse. Before choosing which direction to walk, which option to select, which word to speak, pause and sense field of probability where multiple outcomes are possible. Feel openness before choice collapses probability into definite action. Then make choice and notice how choosing collapses probability field into single manifested outcome. That practice develops experiential recognition of probability field existing before observation choice causes collapse into definiteness, confirming quantum nature of reality operating in direct experience. The fourth practice is observation variation, noticing how different observations create different experiences of same situation. Look at scene normally, notice what appears. Then observe same scene looking for specific color. Notice how what appears shifts based on observation focus. Then observe looking for movement, for patterns, for beauty. Each time noticing how different observation brings different aspects into definite experience from probability field. Same physical situation, different observations, different experienced realities. That practice demonstrates observation affects what manifests from quantum field of possibility. The fifth practice is conscious collapse intention, deliberately choosing what to collapse from probability field. Before entering room, set intention about what you want to observe, perhaps noticing beauty, or opportunities, or connections. Then observe with that intention, and notice how experience aligns with intended observation more than would occur through random chance. Not that you control everything that appears, but that conscious intention influences probability distributions, affecting what collapses into experience when observation occurs. That practice develops experiential recognition that consciousness affects manifestation through observation, not just passively receiving whatever appears. The sixth practice is collective observation recognition, noticing how shared observation creates consistent reality. When multiple people observe same situation, they generally report consistent experience despite each collapsing their own observation. This consistency demonstrates quantum entanglement, creating correlation between different observation points rather than requiring single objective reality existing independently. Practice observing something with another person, then comparing experiences. Notice overlap, where shared observation collapsed into consistent experience, and notice variations where individual observations created different experiential details. That practice confirms you're not solipsistically creating everything, but participating with other observers in co-creating shared reality through correlated collapse. Right now, practice one capacity. Close eyes. Before opening them, notice uncertainty about what you'll see. Then open eyes and observe room. Notice how observation brings definite visual experience into awareness. That simple practice begins training brain to recognize observation, actively collapses probability into experience, rather than passively revealing pre-existing reality. Repeated practice creates experiential foundation, supporting brain reorganization around quantum truth that you're participating consciousness, not separate observer. Something crucial happens during brain reorganization that most people aren't prepared for. Temporary loss of certainty about everything. Not just uncertainty about quantum mechanics or reality's nature. Uncertainty about basic assumptions you never questioned before. Whether you exist as continuous self, whether past actually happened as remembered, whether other people are real, whether anything is reliable. This existential uncertainty isn't consciousness breaking. This is necessary phase of reorganization where old foundations dissolve before new foundations stabilize. But without understanding this is temporary and necessary, uncertainty can trigger retreat to classical worldview to regain false but comfortable certainty. The uncertainty manifests as questioning continuity. If reality is probability collapsing through observation, does you exist continuously between observations? When you're not observing body, does body exist in definite state or return to superposition? When you sleep, does world continue existing, or does it exist only when consciousness observes it? These questions have answers in quantum mechanics, but during reorganization, questions arise faster than answers integrate, creating period where certainty about continuous existence dissolves without new certainty having formed yet, or uncertainty manifests as doubting memory. If observation collapses present reality, what about past? Does past exist as fixed history or as probability that gets collapsed retroactively through present observation? Delayed choice experiments prove observation can affect past quantum events. Does this mean your past isn't fixed but gets determined by present observation? Quantum mechanics says past exists as probability until observed, suggesting memory might be collapsing probability about past rather than accessing fixed history. That recognition can destabilize certainty about whether past happened as remembered or is being created through current observation. Or uncertainty manifests as questioning others' existence. If you're collapsing reality through observation, are other people existing independently or appearing through your observation? When they're not in your presence, do they exist definitely or as probability? Are they conscious observers collapsing their own reality, or are they collapsed patterns in reality you're creating? Quantum mechanics confirms others are independent observers through quantum correlations that couldn't exist if they were just patterns in reality you're creating. But during reorganization, that reassurance hasn't integrated yet, leaving temporary uncertainty about whether solipsism is true. The practice during uncertainty phase is tolerating not knowing without retreating to false certainty. Classical worldview provided certain answers to these questions. You exist continuously, past is fixed, others are real independently. Those answers were comforting but based on false assumption of objective, independent reality. Quantum truth dissolves those certainties, new certainties will form. Based on quantum understanding where you exist as pattern in quantum field, past exists as probability pattern affecting present. Others exist as independent observation points creating correlated reality. But during transition, old certainties have dissolved while new ones haven't formed yet. That gap of not knowing is necessary for reorganization. The practice is also recognizing uncertainty as growth rather than failure. Certainty based on false foundation isn't wisdom, it's comfortable ignorance. Uncertainty arising from encountering truth is more mature than certainty based on unquestioned assumptions. You're not losing understanding. You're outgrowing childish certainty that required reality to be simpler than it actually is. Adult understanding includes uncertainty, paradox, complexity. The uncertainty isn't regression. The uncertainty is progression from false simple certainty toward true complex understanding that includes not knowing as necessary component. I experienced this uncertainty intensely for 2 months during reorganization, questioned whether I existed continuously or emerged with each observation, doubted whether memories were accurate history or collapsed probability about past, wondered whether others were real or manifestations in reality I was creating. The uncertainty was destabilizing, occasionally frightening, sometimes overwhelming. But eventually brain reorganized sufficiently that new certainties emerged. Not classical certainties, but quantum certainties, acknowledging probability, superposition, observation-dependent collapse, while still maintaining functional understanding that allows navigating reality effectively. The uncertainty resolved, but only after allowing uncertainty to exist without retreating to classical certainty that was false, even though comfortable. What's happening individually as your brain reorganizes around quantum truth is happening collectively to thousands globally. This isn't isolated phenomenon affecting random individuals. This is species-wide consciousness evolution, where humanity is reorganizing neural structures around quantum understanding, shifting from classical worldview to quantum recognition. Where enough humans simultaneously undergo brain reset, that collective field itself is transforming from being organized around false classical assumptions to being organized around accurate quantum comprehension. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance explains why brain reorganization is occurring for many simultaneously. As more people's brains reorganize around quantum truth, morphic field strengthens, making reorganization easier for others encountering same truth. First person whose brain reorganized around quantum understanding did so without support, without framework, without validation. Pure cognitive disruption with no cultural context making sense of what was occurring. Second person found reorganization slightly easier because first person's neural restructuring created pattern in field. And now, thousands having undergone reorganization, field contains clear pattern supporting brain reset for anyone encountering quantum truth clearly stated. You're benefiting from everyone whose brain reorganized before yours. From quantum physicists who integrated quantum understanding into neural structures through years of study. From mystics who reorganized around direct experience of non-duality that quantum mechanics now validates. From consciousness researchers who bridged quantum physics and subjective experience, from thousands of ordinary people who've encountered quantum truth and allowed brain reorganization rather than retreating to classical comfort. They created morphic field. They proved reorganization is survivable and beneficial. They demonstrated brain can reorganize around quantum truth without breaking. Their achievement makes your reorganization easier, more supported, more likely to complete successfully. And when your reorganization completes, when neural pathways have restructured around understanding that you're participating consciousness collapsing reality through observation,